there's these huge players in the game, right? There's the huge book publishers out there, and essentially they will only do book deals with people who have massive platforms. I mean, think celebrity, think people who have millions of followers, right? Because when they want to do a book, they want to do a book with someone that has a built-in audience that will guarantee them that they're going to sell tons of books. And so for a large majority of people in the world, they don't have some of those things. And so these book publishers would never talk to them or never give them the time of day. And to Will and I and our entire team, we think that's a bummer because there are so many people out there who have a story, who have things that they can share with other people. And for us at Streamline, it's helping people elevate their why and say, how can you share your story to make an impact? Whether that's a financial planner that we're getting to help them write and publish their book, that's a former athlete. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's so many people out there that have stories. And if you're listening, you know you have a story. Like, there are certain things that you have been through, that you've experienced, whether in business or life or sports or school. Hello and welcome to the Alex Demczak Leadership Podcast. I am so excited for my guest today. It's a good friend and my co-founder of Streamline Books, Will Severns. Will, how are you doing today?
Dude, we made it. We're here. I feel like after hundreds, thousands of conversations over the last year and a half, man, all of a sudden I feel like nervous. Like this is the most important call we've ever had for your podcast episode. But I'm great, man. This is so fun to do it with you.
Well, I'm sure all the people are wondering, and especially the ones watching on YouTube, when we started Streamline, I don't think you had this good of a mustache. Any beginner secrets for people that want to grow a mustache? Any tips for the people out there?
Yeah, it's probably the biggest unfortunate thing if you're just listening to the audio here is that you don't get the visual, but maybe you can hear it, kind of just some of the power, the aura coming through the airwaves. And man, honestly, like the lifespan of Streamline is also the lifespan of the mustache. I mean, I think it was September or October of 2021 that I grew it in. And I remember I was like, okay, I'm going to go mustache on them and let's see. And man, that's right around the time you and I were ramping up. And so, I read a Art of Manliness article where he talked about how to grow a mustache. His biggest thing was grow out all your facial hair, the beard. He says that way you skip like the awkward phases of just growing a mustache, just kind of like the thin wispy thing. He goes, grow everything out. Then when you're ready, shave the beard and you're good to go.
Dude, that's incredible. Okay, so Art of Manliness guy was at your bachelor party. Is that correct? Is that just a rumor?
Close. It was Garvin's. So
Garvin, okay.
yeah, so our mutual friend Garvin Hoy, and I was Garvin's best man in his wedding. So I was in charge of, planning the bachelor party. And I'd followed Brett McKay on Art of Manliness for years. And I wrote him a handwritten, dude. I was like, of all people, I know he'll appreciate the handwritten. And I just asked for some ideas around Tulsa because that's where Garvin and Whitney were getting married. And he gave back a few ideas. One of them was this really cool, like revitalized bowling alley. I think Dust Bowl Lanes. And then I just shot my shot. I said, hey, you want to come bowl with us? And he said, yeah. And so, dude, he came and bowled and hung out with the guys. It was so fun. He's a really great dude.
Dude, Art of Manliness, great blog. Wow. So we go a lot of different directions on this podcast. I'm super excited just for this conversation. For a lot of people listening, know a little bit about my backstory, was in corporate America and then quit and kind of went all in. And, one of the things that I haven't really talked about in the podcast up until this point is one of the reasons why I was able to do that is because we had brewing with Streamline. And so I guess I can start with a little bit of the backstory and then maybe you can fill some gaps. But I wanted to focus this podcast episode on building a business for impact. And I think a lot of people think about, all the benefits of starting a new business or all the exciting things that come, which there are, right? And there are awesome things that mean you could talk about, but there's also days where it's hard and it's a grind. And that's been a little bit of our, lives the last year and a half, 2 years of growing this thing. And when you think about kind of striking out on your own, building a team, doing these things, it's number one, just so much more fun to do it with people around you who you're enjoying it with. And so that's one takeaway that's been so fun the last year and a half. But, you know, and a little bit about our story and kind of how we even started, just for people listening. So we worked at, Christian sports camp together back in college. And so, we connected there and got, for people listening, Will was the essentially, I guess you would say, like the programs guy. Essentially at camp, it's like a comedian. You're the person up on stage who is, able to get up in front of, I don't know, 500 people and make people laugh. So, that's Will has that capacity. And so we're in touch at this camp, friends, kind of went our own separate ways. I went into corporate America, did sales for an awesome company, and then started doing speaking engagements on the side. Will had his own content marketing company. He is, resides in Kansas City. You can see I'm wearing my Chiefs sweatshirt today. And so as we just kind of kept in touch, and I'll let Will, you can talk about this in a second, but I actually read Will's book. So he came out with a book. I saw it on LinkedIn. I read that book and it really hit me and it was really good and convicted me. And so around that time, I was doing all these speaking engagements and, I would interact with people after a talk and they would say, oh, I would love to write a book someday. And I would just kind of be like, well, hey, Johnny, keep at it, keep working hard. You can do it, and I didn't really have an actual kind of resource to help people within this area. And so all the while, you're over with your clients you're working with, starting to do some ghostwriting, content marketing, all these awesome things. And so when I read your book, I remember just calling you and saying, man, like God gave you a gift to write. And we just started talking about, yeah, what could it look like to even work together and maybe even trying to help people write their own book. Shortly out, we kind of just said, okay, cool, let's keep in touch about it. And then, very shortly after that, one of my family friends, Colin Holba, reaches out about how does he do more speaking engagements. We talk about, well, hey, we could help you write your book. That was kind of our first author. So I just wanted to give people some context on how we I don't know, came together on this. And it wasn't just like one day we just woke up and we're like, hey, let's do this. It was all these little, I would say, God moments that kind of brought us together to do this. And so that there's a lot there. That was kind of a mouthful. But Will, from your perspective, I don't know, in doing this for the last year and a half, what, I guess when you think about your why and how we've been growing this thing, what's been fun for you? What's been challenging, and kind of what's exciting for you when it comes to Streamline?
Yeah, man, that was a great summation of kind of how, God just crossed our paths again. There was that span of, 5 or however many years from camp to us reconnecting where, yeah, life just takes you different places, but, we were coming from such an awesome community of, like-minded dudes who were running around, playing sports every summer is so fun. And then in a work from a work standpoint, I just remember, and some of it's social media, seeing you out slinging, crushing these talks. And I just remember from afar being like, man, like, what's Demczak out there, slinging, talking about? I just didn't really know much about it, but I knew enough that you were passionate about using your skill set on stage. And I think that it's cool to look back now because in those moments where I'm like, man, Demczak is just grinding and crushing it. You and I use this phrase now with authors, which is cool, which is, someone you have yet to meet is counting on you to get better today. And so how cool, man, that we can look back on our own story and think in so many ways, like you grinding, even in your corporate space and in your job, but then also speaking like God was preparing you for what we're doing now and the way that you're getting to help our authors now. So it's just so awesome, man. And I remember when we connected and you reached out about my book, Gouge, you were like, Will, you should help others do this. And you had no idea that that's really why I wrote my book, because, and this gets into my story of the content marketing business I had in Kansas City, an offering where people reached out to me about ghostwriting and helping tell stories in book form. And so I was like, no, but it's super intriguing to me. So I kind of did a deep dive into that space, wrote and published my book on Amazon Gouge. You picked it up. And so when you called me, you were like, you should do this. I was like, I know, that's why I'm doing it, you know? And then when we did it for Colin, it was that first glimpse of like, wow, empowering someone else to do this. To your question on like what has been fun, like man, we've gotten that same hit every time, right? Every time we have onboarded a Streamline author, every time we send one off, and it's not, send them off high and dry, see you later. Like the relationships that you and I could talk about for days that I think we are going to have for life in a business, friendship level, all of the things, like God's just done so much over the last year and a half. And so when you ask like what's been fun about it, it's like, man, where do you even begin? Because obviously like the highs are highs. We've had a few lows, but even some of those lows, we look back now and either laugh at, or we can look back at those lows and say those lows made our business better. And doing that together, man, has been so much fun, knowing that like I did the kind of self-employed grind for like 2 to 3 years with Quill before we started Streamline. But man, building a team around a specific offering that we're passionate about, like that is where so much joy has come in. And maybe this leads into like one of the challenges as like we're building this team, which, like we're still very much, it's crazy. Like we signed on our first writer editor in October, and that list is already up, but whether it's with Trevor, whether it's with Nathan, I do think like one of the challenges is like when you start settling into this idea and you start talking about like, man, like we're all in, we're doing this thing, it can just be like really hard to shut it off, and maybe I'll kind of wind down with that. Maybe we could talk about that more, but like when you're truly passionate about something, I think that has been a struggle that you and I have shared in of like, and it makes you sound terrible, but I'll say it for, to be authentic. It's like you're reading your kid a book before bed at night, and all of a sudden an idea for the business pops in and they're like, Dad, turn the page. And you're like, what? Oh yeah. And so it's like, those are the moments, dude, that are good problems to have. But I know we've also like found a lot of joy and commonality and things like the common rule, and encouraging each other that way, which we could get into. So yeah, sorry, that's maybe kind of a blanket, the highs and the lows.
No, that's so good. And for everyone listening, what we do at Streamline Books is we help people write, edit, and publish their book. And we do that in a 16-week process. And so, as I was going around doing these speaking engagements and, Will was starting to write these books, it was pretty incredible. Will was helping write, I mean, gosh, a lot of books at one time and super gifted in that way. And what he alluded to is, we started out with one writer and now I think there's over 35 writers as part of our team. And we're super humbled by that because there's so much great talent that we've had the chance to just be part of. And to your point on building a team, it's just so fun. And one thing I so resonated when you just said that, because about always being on, it's like, back when I worked in corporate, it's like, at least there was like a 9 to 5 mentality and there was like boundaries in place, right? Well, when you kind of are in a startup mode and you run your own business, to your point, it almost can be addicting how fun it is. And that could turn into some unhealthy things and just always being on. And that was honestly one of the reasons why I got out of, I worked at an awesome company, but one of the reasons I left is I was like, I can't keep this pace up. And so one of the things that one of our mutual friends, Christian Jones at his company that he works at, instituted, I'll let you talk about it because you were really the champion of this, but it's been something that's really, I know, been helpful for me, for you, for I think our whole team. And so, yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, man, this is a fun one to talk about just because even just like you hearing that and knowing that it was just a few months ago that you had, and I think rightfully so, like some of your hesitations or like, well, I've just because, yeah. So over the last few years, Lauren and I in Kansas City, we've gotten to become super close. Christiana Jones, they're some of our best friends, and Christian's company called Tax Pro Marketer, where they essentially run digital marketing services for tax professionals out there. So website, SEO, all that stuff. and they just have like a really cool company culture. It started out as just like a few dudes running stuff, but now they have like 10, 15 full-time employees. And one thing that they instituted a few years ago, like in 2018 or 2019, was this sprint sabbatical rhythm for their company. And so the rhythm and what it looks like for them, even though Christian has since said, hey, like this can look different from company to company, but it's essentially you have, so what it is for them, they go 6 weeks on, which is their sprint rhythm, and then weeks 7 and 8 are their sabbatical weeks. And so what their employees do is they split into two teams. So you have team A and then team B. And so they sprint for 6 weeks. And then on week 7, team A takes a sabbatical week. And then in week 8, team B takes a sabbatical week. And so if you are a part of the team who is on during a sabbatical week, you're essentially filling in the gaps for the other people who, are resting. And so what it comes out to be for their company, is like 4 or 5 plus weeks of the year where they aren't doing, they're resting. And for Christian, he's going, Will, and over the last few years of doing life with Christian, just these moments would pop up where he's like, yeah, I got sabbatical next week. And I'd just be like, man, what is that all about? And what that must be like just to have a full week? Because obviously in America and growing more so now, we're familiar with things like unlimited PTO or even just regular, asking for a vacation, 2 or 3 days off. But the whole thing with that week-long sabbatical is that it gives you enough time to totally like decompress from work and rest. And for your company, and this is what Christian has said the whole time, is it's them saying, we are going to pay you to rest, which obviously in the face of like our current work culture, that's just kind of like, what? But it's saying, no, like we have built a business where we have enough, manpower to fill in for you while you rest. And it's so true, dude, in that like, it's a week, the company isn't going to burn down. And if it does, like you probably haven't done a good enough job, like kind of backfilling some of those roles and people who can step up. So cool, man. Even where we're at now, like we've done one rhythm or so, where I guess we're in the middle of the second. And how the last thing I'll say on it is Christian goes, Will, it's that sabbatical week is really just like the cherry on top. The real, kind of the real ice cream sundae of it all is that your team gets the best of you during that sprint rhythm. And bro, I don't know about you, but like I've already felt that. Like I felt it in January and February when we knew that we were going to have rest on the other side of that. It helps you be like, all right, just got to go hard because I know rest is coming.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing that I think we both learned, and Christian kind of warned us this might happen, but he had said like, hey, your first or second time doing this, it's going to feel weird, and I definitely experienced that. We were in Florida on vacation the week I was off, and it was like I don't know if it just revealed to me like maybe how addicted I was to work or notifications, but it was very it was almost like a temptation, like, okay, do I check my email? Do I check Basecamp or whatever? And I think what I realized, after the first few days of me, maybe trying to reach out about certain things in the business, it's like, hey, I'm just going to be completely off. And it was awesome. And so I think each time we do it, I think I have one coming up here in the next month or two. And it's cool. Like you said, it's cool to look forward to know that you're sprinting, you're there, you're present while you're at work in those weeks. But then, you have this time where you're actually unplugging. And I think to your point, the culture is so opposite on that. It's like you see these startup founders, you see these companies who they just end up burning out. And it's just they run at this unsustainable pace. And it's like for us, I think something that we talk about all the time is like, how can we cultivate like this long-term mentality of, yes, long-term growth to be able to grow and help more people write and share their message in their book with the world, but also like for our team internally, like how much of a bummer would it be? Because I know, the first year and a half we built this thing, me and you didn't really look up much. We were just head down. We didn't really take much vacation. If we did, we had our laptops with us working, trying to, help as many people as we can, which was fun. But at times it's like, man, this isn't sustainable. And I remember us both kind of saying that because it's hard. It's something that we deeply care about. And so, another thing that we did in the last few months, which was, I think, so cool, and we're going to do more and more of them each quarter, is we've been doing this, me and you, we've been doing a quarterly summit. And this past one, our chief technology officer, Trevor, who's a stud, he's awesome. He lives in Indiana. And we all went to St. Louis, and we spent 2 days essentially like in the public library. We got a conference room, and it was like, what, 8 hours each day, talking about all these future things, whether it's a 10-year vision, which is like overwhelming to talk about, or what are our core values? What are our 3 differentiators? And I think maybe you can hit on some of those that we talked about, because I think for anyone listening, when you think about building a business, whether you're a solopreneur or you want to grow with team members, whatever that looks like for you, I think it has to start with like defining almost the end game. Like, what is the purpose? Not only what is the purpose of this business, what makes us different? Like, why do we want to do this? Like, why do we want to cultivate this awesome culture in what we're doing? And what do we think is going to come from that? So yeah, talk to us about just that summit that we had in St. Louis, locking ourselves in a room, and what stood out to you from that day for you?
Yeah, man, that was a special 48 hours. And I think one thing that was cool is that you and I had just gotten done in our first year where, yeah, like the first 3 or 4 of those things we did was just you and I. And where we are kind of work from home, work from anywhere, style business is the way our model's set up. You and I got a taste in that first year of, wow, how impactful that in person is after you've been going virtual for so long. And so I think the first time we did it with Trevor in St. Louis was really eye-opening of like, man, how can we recreate more moments like this? And I know a lot of that is quite literally starting with next week, from the moment of this recording, we're going to be in Kansas City together, and just getting more people in the mix for those in-person events just really gets me excited. But yeah, I think as for St. Louis and some of the operating system that you alluded to, which is EOS, entrepreneurial operating systems. I mean, man, I think last summer was when you and I first started talking about rocket fuel. Even though the other book in EOS that is becoming increasingly more popular is Traction. And when I had Quill Creative, my content marketing business in Kansas City, I'd kind of walked people through that book. If they were just struggling with gaining traction in their business, I was like, well, there's this book called Traction and it's growing in popularity. And so we'd read through it. I read through it with a couple of my Quill clients, but I never took them through, or we never really conducted it in such a like regimented way. But for you and I starting Streamline, it was like, bro, we have to lock it in and do Traction like for real. And so we talked to an implementer because EOS has grown to the point where they are bringing on full-time implementers that go around and they implement EOS, Traction, Rocket Fuel into businesses. And we were just like, oh man, like we probably aren't quite at the spot to where we can bring in an implementer. But Trevor, who you already mentioned, was like, guys, this stuff just sounds really intriguing to me. And we were like, man, if you think you can run point on it all, and bro, he's just like knocked it out of the park. And so he has kind of served as maybe like a little bit of our in-house EOS implementer, and he's just done so great. Now, Traction and EOS and those, what we covered in that conference room, man, like none of it is so revolutionary, because you walk out of there with like your core values and your core focus as a business, and your 3 uniques, what makes your business different from anyone else, like in your industry. But Traction just gives such a solid process. Like, for instance, take core values. Any business that's like, yeah, it's important to come up with core values. But bro, that was like an hour or 2 session, and what they have you do is they say, pick out 3 employees in your company. And for us, we were like, well, that's easy because we only have 3. And, for us, it was like Trev, Annika, Nathan. Each of them kind of covers a different role in our business. And then what Traction says is, they say, pick 3 people in your company you wish you could clone. And which is just kind of a funny question, but it's cool because, and again, we were like, well, we only have 3 people, but they're all awesome. And then they say, go through each person and list out all their awesome character qualities? Like, what makes each of those three people great? And so we did it. We said Trevor, which is fun because he was in the room, and you and I just kind of got to dote on Trevor for a little bit. We were like, he's hardworking, he's creative, he has ingenuity, and all these things. And you list out all of these for all these three people, and they go, your core values are somewhere in that list. And we were just like, wow. And so then we just kind of got to put our core values as a company together. Then traction, it's like, now you set up what's called the speech, I think they call it. So you present your core values to your company. And so for us, by that time, we had like 20 to 25 writers on our list. And so we said, let's set up a call. So we did that, presented our core values, said, this is who we want to be. So yeah, I think it's a blend of, such a cool operating system that EOS brought to the table for us. I didn't even really talk about rocket fuel, which is something you and I really resonated with, because it talks about the relationship between kind of two people at the top of a company, which is your visionary and your integrator. And I know you mentioned like your father-in-law had been on that book for a minute trying to get you to read it, but it's like for the first time, you and I actually had a reason to. And so EOS has been awesome, but then also I think pairing all of that like with the deeper why. I mean, we've had a couple of recent authors, a couple prospective authors say like, what's your guys' why? And it's so cool because it's like, glad you asked, because that's really why we're doing this thing, and I don't know, maybe you could talk about a little bit about our theme verse and how we landed on that in the fall, because man, I think that our why is going to continue to drive everything else for Streamline.
Yeah, that's so cool. And for everyone listening, Will has a company called Membands, and what he does is you have to just Google it, membands.com, and he makes these bracelets for, companies use them, individuals if they want to memorize scripture or all kinds of different things. It's a really cool resource. And so we have been talking like, hey, what's a cool company verse that we want to live by and try to kind of align what we do with. And so we landed on Proverbs 31:8-9. And Proverbs 31:8 says essentially, open your mouth for the mute. And when we talk about people being on mute in today's society, we're not to say that people who want to write a book, they are mute or they're looked down upon. It's just to say that in today's culture, so many people are on mute, and they are kind of, even an example in our industry, in the book publishing industry, there's kind of, and just for people listening, here's some background on kind of our niche and where we're at as a business. The book publishing industry, there's these huge players in the game, right? There's the huge book publishers out there, and essentially they will only do book deals with people who have massive platforms. I mean, think celebrity, think people who have millions of followers, right? Because when they want to do a book, they want to do a book with someone that has a built-in audience that will guarantee them that they're going to sell tons of books. And so for a large majority of people in the world, they don't have some of those things. And so these book publishers would never talk to them or never give them the time of day. And to Will and I and our entire team, we think that's a bummer because there are so many people out there who have a story, who have things that they can share with other people. And for us at Streamline, it's helping people elevate their why and say, how can you share your story to make an impact? Whether that's a financial planner that we're getting to help them write and publish their book, that's a former athlete. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's so many people out there that have stories. And if you're listening, you have a story. Like there are certain things that you have been through, that you've experienced, whether in business or life or sports or school, that you have this perspective that you're able to share with other people, that it may be routine and it comes easy to you. But when you tell other people about it, they're like, whoa, like, how do you do that? And you're like, well, I didn't even know that was special. Right. But it's something that can help another person. And so, yeah, I love, Will, you bringing that up of our company versus our why. I think for us, it's saying, how can we get busy helping other people really pursue for what for a lot of them is their dream of, hey, sharing their story. And really, it's a cathartic experience. Many people that we work with, for in some ways, they've never like released their story into the world. And so for us and our team, we're able to come alongside them in kind of this innovative, way to help them share their story and then publish a book. And so for many people, it's helping them launch out to get speaking engagements. It's helping them launch out using their book as a, credibility, as something to impact others. And so, yeah, I love you bringing that up because that's kind of the core at why we do what we do. And so I think, Will, what's going to be really cool about this, I know we have so many exciting things even this year coming down the pipe, and so there's so many things we could talk about. But I think it's going to be cool 5 years from now when we go back and listen to this episode, because it's cool just to see where we're at in year one, essentially year 1.5. And it's just funny too when I think back to when we just started this. I was in corporate America and kind of doing this on the side. You had all these clients for your content marketing business that you had, and what's crazy is I remember, I was kind of like, yeah, maybe, 8 months from now, 6 months from now, I'll quit my job and I'll pursue this. And, you're like, yeah, maybe I'll do less of my content marketing clients. And what's just crazy is I just felt called to make the jump. And so I remember it was not long after that, I remember calling you and being like, hey, I'm quitting. And you're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm quitting. And then what's cool is we started to bring on so many authors that you were able to, dwindle down the clients that you had with your marketing. And now you're, a lot more passionate, seems like, about what we're doing as far as helping people launch their book and share their story. And so I think I just wanted to add that for people listening, in that you might not feel ready to make a jump. You might not feel like, oh, I don't have everything together. I need to wait until XYZ. I definitely think there's a lot of wisdom to being prepared and making sure that you do have things lined up. But at some point, you never can be fully ready. You just have to, at some point, take the jump and take the risk, and just trust that God has your future mapped out for you in that way, if you kind of trust and rely on Him. And so I know both of us have experienced that. But yeah, well, I mean, what would you say to the business owner or the aspiring entrepreneur, speaker, author that's like, hey, I have this passion to pursue this thing out there, but am I ready? Do I have the voice to do that? What would you tell that person?
Yeah, totally. So I think what's even cool, man, sometimes I don't think we talk about this enough, but we talk about Colin and how he was our first author, but it's so cool that so much of the meaning behind his first book, I mean, the book is literally titled Leap, and it is so cool that that was the first book we got to help write, because his whole thing is, taking that, and he goes deeper. And we helped him think through, you hear that phrase, leap of faith, but there are some really cool things about his book. You should go buy it and read it, where he really talks about the importance of leaping alongside others and like community. And yeah, man, I think that there's just been something so cool, and it's just part of Lauren and I's story and how we started Quill. Like, it was really kind of like, I would use that phrase, necessity is the mother of invention, to where it was like, man, like we were trying to start our own marketing business. And I'm like looking at my 2-year-old and it's like, this kid's got to eat, and so that's a driver in itself, to make the thing work. And I think for Streamline too, like, I just do not, like, we would not be here right now had you not, taken that leap. And then of course after that, it gave me courage to be like, man, like maybe I can kind of notch off these other quill clients I was working with. And yeah, man, maybe just on a deeper level, I just feel like the moments in my life where I have felt like closest to the Lord and just like my reliance on Him is when I need to be reliant, like when, and again, like there's for sure some like cultural elements to this, of like when you're doing good and you're not really worried about your bank account and you're just focused on getting more, like you don't need to depend on God then. Like you're killing it, either at work or all this stuff. But if you're living your life in a way where there's always a little bit of like, I don't know if we're going to make it through, like then you always have to lean on God for like the next step. So yeah, dude, I can say more on that, but I just think that it was such a cool way to kick off our business, because it definitely did something in me to see you make that kind of move. Because it was just like, wow, Alex believes in what we're doing. Helped me believe in it that much more.
Yeah, thanks for that encouragement. That's awesome. And so this is kind of a random question, but I think there's people listening that maybe this would help them. So I said at the beginning of the podcast, you were doing programs, you're up in front of 500 people, could make people laugh. we just try to do fun things in our business that are, whether funny or fun. And yeah, you lead a lot of those initiatives, which are awesome. And yeah, I mean, you just have the skill and the ability to just be really funny. So, what would you tell people? I guess if there's someone who maybe is in what they think is a boring business, or they're like, well, I don't really enjoy my job. What would you say? This is super random, but it just came to me. What's a way to almost like spice up what they're doing? And then what are your kind of keys to, I don't know, improv? What would you say to someone who's like, man, I would like to speak, I would like to do comedy? What would you say to that person that as what's helped you as you're up in front of a stage of 500 people with a wig on and doing dance moves? What would you say to the people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, man, it's like my mind goes immediately to, I'll never forget the first summer working at camp. I was pulling out of my driveway, like at my parents' house, and, getting ready to go to staff training week. And it was me and Thomas McNutt that summer getting ready to do programs. McNutt, we know, is just like one of the funniest humans of all time. And I remember as I was pulling out of the driveway, my mom was there kind of waving me off and kind of joking, kind of not. I said, Mom, I said, what if I'm not funny this summer? And she looked at me, dude, and she goes, Will, she said, you don't have to be funny. You just have to be fun. And it was just like, oh man, that's a good word. And I just like, yeah, the next 2 years on programs, I really led with that. So much so that our mutual friend Shay has told me, he's like, Will, I tell, like at leadership training weekend every summer, he goes, I tell our program staff Mama Severns quote every year. And I was just like, dude, talk about a legacy piece. And man, I carried that into camp to the point where I knew I was in that role, right? Of like on stage, all this stuff. But ultimately, man, camp was filled with so many great people. 100 of those guys could have fulfilled that role, and done just as good of a job. And I remember just wanting to recognize that. And so at a couple of the counselor meetups, I would just tell the guys, like, turn your own activity into programs. I would say a lot of, we all knew what it was like to be stuck on archery. It's like you see that you're leading archery at 3 p.m. in the afternoon in the Branson heat, and you're just like, oh my gosh. But I would tell them, turn that into a program skit, about how you're going on a hunt and you're trying to feed your family, and, give everyone special names and all this stuff. And I remember seeing counselors like light up with that. And so I would, in coming back to your question, say, like, no matter the position you are in your job, it's even kind of like, I like this terminology, they think, oh man, if they're going, wow, Will and Alex, like entrepreneurs starting this business, kind of this terminology has come on in the last couple of years of like being an intrapreneur, like INT, intra, of like, even if you're within the company, you can still do things that are entrepreneurial in spirit, so kind of per the season, start your March Madness bracket. It's like, do these things in your company that creates this culture that everyone wants to be a part of. If you are in a spot where you aren't quite there to go out on your own, launch your own business, create your own culture, it's like you can totally shift and change culture from within. But what you and I are getting to do, man, has been like some of the most fun in at least my career, which is starting from the ground up, man. So that's a great question.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I think about, I had the chance to visit Dave Ramsey's facility this past, actually last year. And, I've had a lot of respect for the books that he writes, the podcasts he does. And I remember, yeah, I mean, just going to that facility, there's over 1,000 employees now. And when I walk into that place, there's just something different. And it's like, I think it's just the culture. People love what they do. They're excited to be there. And yeah, I just walk out of a place like that saying like, wow, like that's to these people, that's what work looks like. And it looks so radically different from some other places that I go and speak at. And I feel like there's dry bones at the culture there, like I know you said use that phrase a lot, but it's like, you know, I think a lot of people think, well, you know what, I'm just a victim of the culture, like I don't really control the culture that I'm in. But the reality is, like, so many of us have have a say in the culture, whether that's a culture of your family or just even your small team. And so I really appreciate you saying that. I think just one last thing as we close. Yeah, I guess what would be your final charge to, maybe someone who is in a job where they're going, man, I don't see myself doing this forever. I know there's other things out there for me. Um, you know, I'm sure every day, I know for even you and I, there's days, there's ups and downs. But what would you say to the person who's like, man, I know there's something else for me. I'm just not there yet. What would be your encouragement to that person who's maybe struggling and like, you know what? I know that this job that I am in is not it. What's my light at the end of the tunnel? What would your final charge and encouragement be to that person?
Yeah, great question. Drew and I, my brother, we talk about this phrase sometimes of like truth is somewhere in the middle, usually. On one end of the extreme, it's like, someone, if they're hearing this podcast and it's like, that's it, I'm quitting tomorrow. But then on the other side of the extreme is like, no, like I really think the safe bet, like even if I have this hunch or this inkling of like I want to go do my thing, I just know that the safest bet is to ride this out the next 30, 40 years, retire, just kind of traditional. And it's like there isn't anything inherently wrong with either of those extremes, but somewhere in the middle, like if you feel that desire of like, man, at some point I would love to start my own thing, then it's like, how can you do both? Like, how can you continue to be like a faithful, loyal, whether it's employee or part of a team, wherever you're at, but at the same time, start to slowly build this thing, on the side or start dreaming and like how can you do those things? And that is very possible. And that like at no other time in history is it more accessible or is it more important? How many articles have we seen over the last year plus of just like corporate wide layoffs? Obviously it's hit like industries big in tech and now like banking stuff. Like no business is really safe, but the safest thing you can do if you're your own boss is create your own deal. It's like one nice thing about you and I, it's like we get to wake up tomorrow knowing we aren't going to get fired. um and so yeah, we follow people on LinkedIn. You and I will bounce back and forth, just guys who, like Justin Welsh or whoever else, where they're really trying to encourage people to like start your own thing ASAP. Everyone has their own story, everyone has their own skill set or expertise, and there are ways that you can just start to slowly push the ball down the field until one day, yeah, maybe it does make sense like you did. Because yes, even though you took a leap and you said, Will, I'm quitting my job. I mean, that was preceded by 4 or 5 years grinding, speaking, to where, yes, it was this huge leap of faith, but it also wasn't founded on nothing beneath it.
Yeah, that's a great word. And I think, as we, talk about building a business for impact, I think you and I just humbly and with our team are trying to do that to where when we look back on just all the amazing authors we get to work with, amazing just people we meet in the process. I think it's going to be really cool to look back and know that, what, we didn't do everything perfectly. We didn't always have all the answers, but we had like this why and this purpose of, what, we feel like God's called us to do this work. We feel like there's so many people out there that need their story to be told. And how can we tell more of those stories? And so there's so many more exciting updates that are, we have coming up, and I'm sure we'll get to those in the future. But yeah, well, this has been awesome. I just think my final encouragement for people out there, like Will said, would be, what's one step you can take? Whether it's maybe you're in the startup of your dreams and you're growing it and it's great, but what's like one practical next step you can take? But for you, if you're not there, like what's a small step? It doesn't have to be like Will said, quitting tomorrow, but what is something that you can do to take just the next step in that direction? In obedience, in your thoughts, in the way that your mindset is, and following what you feel like you're called to do. So I want to thank you so much for being on this podcast. Will, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure as always. The mustache is looking better by the day. It's coming in nice and thick. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, man. I think with every new author we bring on, mustache gets a little thicker, So logging a lot of miles, man, so fun. I know in so many ways, and I hope that this podcast doesn't come across to anyone as like we've arrived, or like we've done it. I mean, dude, we are always building this thing. We're always refining. And again, it's so fun to do it with you, man. And yeah, I know we have a lot of exciting things in 2023 planned that'll be fun to announce to any listener here.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us on this episode. You can check out willmembans.com, more about his business. And then obviously for our business, Streamline Books, you can go to writemybooks.com. Again, that's writemybooks.com, where we're helping people write, edit, and publish their story and their message in book form and share it with the world. So I hope this was an encouragement to you, just to take the next step this week. What's one thing that you can do to apply it to your mindset and to your work and to your life. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and go make a difference.